I decided to start prioritizing my biology. And I am very passionate about health reclamation. That's my, as you mentioned, that was my entree into the sovereignty world, was understanding that my body has infinite wisdom and that illness is not actually what we think it is, and our symptoms are messages, and absolutely everything can be transformed. Okay, so that's my background. But still, because I'm such a mentalizer, I didn't spend a lot of time home in my body. And one of the cardinal, signs of that was that I would do what most women do. And we really learned this in grade school, is that I would pee, like literally go to the bathroom and pee on someone else's schedule, right? So if I'm having a conversation socially or professionally, I would wait until it was convenient. And then I would use language like, I'll be right back, or I'm going to go pee quick, or I'm just going to be a minute, right? And so I am in so many ways really cementing that fragmentation from my own body, from my own, and it sounds like, seriously, Kelly, but it's
from your own programming. No, I follow that.
Yeah. So I decided to start to prioritize it. So what I would do is literally I remember the first time, it was a Luke story. If anyone follows his
I know
podcast.
Luke.
Yeah. So it was on his podcast, and he has long form podcasts. And so I was sitting there, and it was like 3 hours or something, and I had to pee. Okay. And it was the first time I had been on hundreds, maybe thousands of podcasts. Okay. And this was the first time in my entire career that I said, you know what? This is not live. I'm going to go. And maybe even if it was, I would have, but I said, I'm going to go to the bathroom. So no qualifiers. And I went and I peed. And then the last part of this practice is that I would actually focus on the pleasure of moving from having to pee to the relief of having to pee. So there's so many inbuilt pleasurable experiences that the body offers. I mean, simple, like I live in Miami. Okay. I'm blessed. And I will walk out the door. The breeze is the exact temperature of my skin. So I just feel this wave of sensation through my body that is somehow like impossible to even detect. I mean, it's so pleasurable. And if I were in my doingness, I could easily miss that because I would be thinking about the next thing I'm doing, right? So all of this inbuilt, I could like run my fingernails up my arm and feel like shivers up my spine. There's so much pleasure available in my body. And in these simple, mundane ways, even through just enjoying peeing, I started to reclaim that. I started to listen to my body literally, not like a figurative spiritual worldview, but literally. Are my feet cold? Get socks. Am I actually thirsty? Don't put it off, right? Am I tired? Lay down and take a nap, even if I, have a thing in 30 minutes. And that reunion, I think, was the foundation of coming into a different locus of my worth, right? So that I could start to thaw, believe me, I'm not complete yet, but I would start to thaw this very well-conditioned experience of myself as valuable because of what I can do for somebody else and what it is that I have achieved or checked off. And as somebody who has really scaled the mountain of feminism and a lot of, neoliberal programming around that over the course of my life, I, in some ways, got to the summit. As a successful entrepreneur, totally independent, self-sufficient woman and mother, and I don't need a man kind of stuff. And I got to the top several years ago, one of the summits, let's say, where I experienced all the promises of my, I can do what you can do bleeding kind of, psychology and enculturation. And I just looked around and I didn't feel the things I was promised I would feel. I didn't feel strong and free and powerful, right? On some superficial level, perhaps.
What did you feel?
Hollow. I felt bereft. And, I actually, a decade after the fact, only at that point started to grieve having broken up my family. I have 2 teenage daughters and, I put my career first.
Yeah.
I was a career woman, probably up until a few years ago. And then I put a man who was not their father first. And I never really experienced my role and my choice to become a mother. I never prioritized that consciously. But what I would argue is I chose that because it was my priority. And then I came at odds with my own priorities, right? And I decided, well, actually, my career comes before my husband and my kids. It's my dharma, I'm here for this, and it's my mission, and I got to do it. And I'm, uniquely talented at whatever it is that I do, and people seem to benefit from it. And all of the actual dimensions of the victim triangle that I was occupying, as an activist, as you could say healer or facilitator, were revealed to me. And all I felt was the deep grief that I don't have my family around me, that my kids are schlepping between houses and whatever. And that's what I felt. That's literally what I felt in the first 7-figure year I had, working 2 hours a week with my credentials and my New York Times bestseller. I started to really feel like this pain that I had suppressed through avoidance and distraction and workaholism. And as I mentioned earlier, addiction to the kind of stimulus that arises from conflict. And, that professionally that's called activism, and personally that's called love addiction. And it's a kind of really habitual, it's a subconscious generation of the conditions for conflict. And thawing that required that I meet the pain, right? So when you asked me earlier, how did you get to this place where what's alive for you is slowness and stillness and kind of almost like boring life. There was, a lot for me to meet inside before I could start to just be still, have a less scheduled day, experience, I stopped drinking. I don't have a nightlife. I don't even like nightlife. I realized, I thought that I love clubbing and love going out, and I don't. I mean, you'll find me in bed at 9:30, and I have a pretty simple gig, and that is the result of years of really just holding myself as all of these parts try to drum up issues.
Yeah, you could say it's a boring life, or you could say it's a more present life.